Record. Hi, good morning or good afternoon, whatever it might be for you. I am Lieutenant Commander Kelley Edwards with the U.S. Coast Guard, here today to speak to you about cyber risk management within the marine transportation system. But a little bit about myself and my background first. I am a graduate of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, the degree in logistics and transportation. My experience in the maritime industry spans over 18 years, to include service in the Coast Guard for the past 12 within the marine safety and security fields. I'm currently assigned at Coast Guard headquarters in the Office of Port and Facility Compliance, Domestic Ports Division. There, my responsibilities include national policy, development of national policies and field guidance in support of the protection and cyber risk management of U.S. critical infrastructure and the marine transportation system. So prior to this position, I was assigned and studied within the Coast Guard's Marine Industry Port Safety and Security Training Program with a focus in cybersecurity, specifically within the MTS. And then previous to that, I had served at the Coast Guard Marine Safety Detachment in Cincinnati and as a Marine inspector and investigator at Coast Guard sectors Miami and Delaware Bay in Philadelphia. And alongside me today, we have Josie Long from MITRE. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Lieutenant Commander Edwards. I'm currently working at MITRE, which is a federally funded research and development corporation, where I am the lead cybersecurity framework profile developer. Prior to that, I had served in the Coast Guard for 20 years. Also in the Office of Port and Facility Compliance, where I spent 4 years developing cyber policy for the marine transportation system, primarily focused on developing the cybersecurity framework profiles that we will speak to later in the presentation. I've also served primarily up and down the Mid-Atlantic and East Coast. Kelley and I had served together in Philadelphia back in the day. So we're happy to be here and happy to be presenting together. And look forward to presenting what's happening within the marine transportation system. Over to you, Kelley.
Great, thanks, Josie. So for today's agenda, we will be going over an overview of the Coast Guard's role in the marine transportation system, as well as diving into some of those cybersecurity framework profiles that we developed with MITRE, as well as the newest guidance, the Navigation Inspection Circular for cyber risk management within the MTS, as well as the vessel work instruction in conjunction with the IMO resolution for cyber risk management, and then a look at how we're building the Coast Guard cyber workforce and our maritime port and stakeholder engagement. And then a little bit on some of the info sharing that we do. One of those avenues that we utilize being our marine safety information bulletins. And finally, the Maritime Cyber Risk Assessment Model, as we fondly call MICRAM. And that will close up for the day. So first up, the Coast Guard role within the MTS. So overall, the cybersecurity role within the MTS, it's a critical component of the national supply chain. The MTS is increasingly becoming reliant on computer networks and systems for efficiency and for safety. The Coast Guard serves as the maritime sector risk management agency for preventing and responding to cyber events within the MTS. The Coast Guard is utilizing a whole of government approach towards managing cyber risks in the MTS. Much of the current approach involves the incorporation of cybersecurity and cyber risk management into existing frameworks and authorities, while working with other government agencies on enhancing the focus on cyber. So overall Coast Guard authorities within the MTS. So the Assistant Commandant for Prevention Policy, or CG5P, develops and maintains policy standards and program alignment for the prevention activities of the Coast Guard to achieve marine safety, security, stewardship, and mission success. The Prevention Directorate includes policy experts in waterways management, navigation safety, boating, commercial vessels, ports and facilities, and merchant mariner credentialing, vessel documentation, marine casualty investigation, inspection, and port state control. So quite a few missions there within the Coast Guard 5P. Specifically with the Coast Guard Office of Port and Facility Compliance, CGFAC, our missions are to develop and implement programs that prevent safety, security, and environmental incidents in the maritime arena, and to protect continued vitality of the marine transportation, or the MTS. So of particular focus, our facilities are regulated under the Maritime Transportation Security Act, or MTSA, of 2002. Some other offices that are focused in the cyber, in the world of cyber and the marine transportation system is our Office of Cyber Space Forces, or CG791, where their goal is to build out our Coast Guard cyber workforce and obtaining cyberspace capabilities, competencies, and the capacity to meet our operational requirements. Additionally, we have our Coast Guard Cyber Command, or CG Cyber, and their mission is to ensure the security of cyberspace, maintain superiority over our adversaries, and safeguard our nation's critical maritime infrastructure. And very much in alignment with the Coast Guard cyber strategy, with defending Coast Guard cyberspace, operating and maneuvering within the Coast Guard enterprise, mission platform to ensure Coast Guard mission execution in all domains, while aggressively defending our part of the DoD information network. And then finally, enabling Coast Guard operations and protecting the maritime transportation system. So that's what we're highlighting today, is that protection of the maritime transportation system, to protect the maritime critical infrastructure by delivering effects and capabilities in and through cyberspace. And then finally, the assistant commandants for response policy, intelligence, and capability, in conjunction with Coast Guard cyber and prevention policy, as a group, facilitate planning, coordination, prevention for response efforts with the involvement of various other government and industry partners to maximize the benefits across a broad spectrum of participants. So maintaining that cyber exercise program amongst those offices. So that is our overview of the Coast Guard's role with cyber within the MTS. Moving on to our cybersecurity framework profiles, and this is where I'm going to turn it back over to Josie to give us that overview. Josie?
Thank you. Yeah, one thing to note on that previous slide is the amazing amount of Coast Guard entities that are focused on marine transportation system cybersecurity and increasing the cyber posture of the MTS. I think we're thanks. So I do want to give a highlight of where we have been and why we're here, and then I will turn it back over to Kelley of where the Coast Guard is going. So Executive Order 13636 required that the National Institute of Standards and Technology develop a framework. The framework now is titled the Cybersecurity Framework. Basically, it's a consolidated effort of all resources that were focused on improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. It's focused on 5 functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. There are 20 plus categories, and then currently 108 subcats. The framework itself has been widely lauded and adopted within critical infrastructure owners. And I can personally say it's an easy way to have a communication tool to have those important cybersecurity discussions, both with IT, information technology, and OT, operational technology owners and stakeholders. And specifically within the marine transportation system and those stakeholders that are focused on MTS cybersecurity, it's been a very useful tool for the Coast Guard to be able to communicate cybersecurity. The Coast Guard, back in starting in 2016, partnered with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, specifically the National Cyber Center of Excellence, to develop cybersecurity framework profiles. So what is a profile? A profile is the customization of the framework focused on, with the Coast Guard specifically, industry-wide cyber, and focused on maritime bulk liquid transfer, which is the transfer of hazardous cargo over the water, eventually passenger vessels. So think of your cruise ships, your Disney cruise, as well as smaller entities such as whale watching and small passenger vessels. And then lastly, offshore. So think of your offshore platforms. The benefits specifically for the Coast Guard is having again, mentioning that communication tool, and being able to come into an environment where you use something like the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is voluntary, non-regulatory, and being able to have open communication with those industry stakeholders, all working for the common goal of increasing the cyber posture of the maritime entities that those three profiles the Coast Guard's previously developed represent. Again, maritime bulk liquid transfer, passenger vessel, and then offshore. The benefits, again, having that profile published, working with industry to develop those profiles, and then overall having a communication tool between a regulatory body and maritime industry, and specifically increasing critical infrastructure ownership within the MTS. Next slide, please. Great. So relationship between the cybersecurity framework profiles and the organization cybersecurity drivers. And who is the audience and intended usability and user of these profiles. So you do have, it is focused on critical infrastructure owners, as I mentioned, that Executive Order 13636, which was directed at critical infrastructure owners. You have the cybersecurity profile, or excuse me, the cybersecurity framework, voluntary, non-regulatory, and then you have the applicable industry profiles. So focused on marine transportation owners, as I already mentioned, the MBLT, the offshore, as well as cruise ship. And then the organizational cybersecurity drivers. So you have laws, regulations, and mission needs. You have the applicable cybersecurity framework profiles, and then you have relevant implementation of standards and practices. So it's all embodied under the profile and focused on those informative references that are aligned with the 108 subcats of that CSF. And again, as a reminder, you have the 5 functions of the CSF, you have 20 plus categories, and then you have 108 subcats. The specific profiles drive down to the subcategory level of what is the most applicable high priority subcats to implement to increase your cyber posture, buy down your cyber risk. And those are all driven from industry input. And I'll get into a little bit of how a profile is developed and the meaningful relationship between industry, the Coast Guard, and how those profiles are developed. Next slide, please. Great. So profiles, again, I'm giving a little bit more of a recap. You have those 5 functions represented here with the identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. You have the categories that are in the middle graphic, and then it gets to the subcat. So in the workshop, which is what we drive to create the profile, you recruit industry stakeholders. So for example, the maritime bulk liquid transfer, we recruited specifically oil and natural gas operators. And ironically, the Port of Philadelphia was very gracious in hosting and participating in the first development of the MBLT profile. So in person, the workshops are about 2 days. Virtually, they will span over 3 to 5 weeks, depending on the audience, aptitude and time for volunteering their time in stakeholder subject matter expertise. You focus on identifying what are the mission objectives. So what are those high level organization priorities that are applicable to their operation. And we'll dive into some of those mission objectives later in the presentation to identify some of those facilitated brainstorming sessions that we were able to achieve the mission objectives from those stakeholders. Similar for offshore operations, what are those high level organizational functions? I do like to say in the workshop environment, what keeps you up at night? what operation or inaction is so vital that catastrophic failure or bad things will happen. Once those mission objectives are identified, you identify under each of the categories of the CSF what are most applicable under each of those mission objectives. And then once you get to the subcat level of identifying between those 108 subcats, what operation is going to be most vital, the subcat most vital to that mission objective or that operation in mitigating any of the cyber risk. Next slide, please. Great. So as I promised, we do have some examples of the mission objectives. Again, this is done the first day of a profile workshop, whether it's in person or virtual. You really want to start brainstorming what are those high-level organizational objectives, functions, business operations. So for the maritime bulk liquid transfer, and you will see within the maritime environment, a lot of these are very similar to each other. Maintain personal safety. You cannot operate if there are any casualties, loss of human life. Maintain environmental safety. We've seen that with some of the incidents within the maritime environment, such as Deepwater Horizon, dating back to 1990 with the XN Valdez. Loss of product into the environment is no good. So safeguarding those assets, those cyber, specifically those control systems that support cyber systems that mitigate any environmental safety concerns. You have operational security, maintain preparedness. I do like with specifically the maritime bulk liquid transfer profile, the maintain preparedness. Sometimes that is lost as far as planning and preparing to plan, and exercising those plans is vital. Quality of product, specifically this one, you'll start to get into the business function. So, oil tankers, chem tankers, you cannot sell your product if it's by any means been degraded. HR requirements, audits, inspections, maintain timely vessel clearance. And I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge with the first profile, again, the maritime bulk liquid transfer, that the industry members that participated with the Coast Guard in developing this, it is an odd relationship, mainly because this is the regulatory body that's coming in and saying, please tell us what is important for your cyber control systems. Please, share willingly with the regulatory body that is visiting you every 6 to 12 months. What is vital, what are your control systems that support those vital mission objectives, et cetera. So that first profile was it was a very awesome win for the Coast Guard, and I would say Maritime, as far as being able to have those communications, again, in a voluntary, non-regulatory environment. Again, the profile is by industry for industry. The CSF itself was always intended to be voluntary, non-regulatory, as a communication means, a way to buy down your enterprise cybersecurity risk and overall increase your cyber posture. So I'd say that first profile was a very big win for the Coast Guard. Next slide, please.
Here we go.
Great. And now you will see the offshore operations. There are 12 mission objectives here. And as I mentioned, that maintain personal safety, number 1, maintain environmental safety, number 2, very similar across the board. You cannot have loss of human life. You cannot lose product and pollute the water. Some of the differences: maintain reliability, maintain continuity, integrity of operations, maintain cyber situational awareness. If you think of dynamic positioning with any of the offshore industry, it's extremely important. Personnel competencies, offshore rigs rely wholly on that crew. So I do like the aspect of training for this high-level mission objective that the industry stakeholders provided. Consistent and effective stakeholder communications, operational efficiency, secure communications. Again, we do have that regulatory compliance, and with audits and inspections. Again, going back to those initial conversations, you'd be remiss as an industry stakeholder to not acknowledge that you do have to maintain regulatory compliance with your regulatory bodies. Third-party integration and logistics. So a little bit of diversity between the maritime bulk liquid transfer, again, the transfers of hazardous cargo over the water compared to offshore operations. Next slide, please. Great. So now quick overview of the passenger vessel profile and those mission objectives. So again, you still see that maintain human safety as number one. You get a little bit different from the previous two profiles between mission objective 2 and 3. And I should have acknowledged this earlier in the presentation, but each of these mission objectives are a prioritization of what the industry finds to be most vital. In the workshop environment, we have a voting tool that we use. It's based on the Fibonacci sequence that allows any of the industry stakeholders to say what is most important of the mission objectives. So the workshop itself goes through an initial brainstorm of mission objectives, and then we go through and prioritize them. So deviating from the previous two profiles, then mission objective number 2, maintain safety and reliance. And then we get to that environmental safety number 3. What I will say most interesting about the passenger vessel community and those stakeholders, they very much collaborate. And if you think of one cruise ship impacting the entire fleet, regardless of who owns those assets, the entire fleet now has that service reputation of having an issue. So the passenger vessel and the cruise ship industry very much melds together, they collaborate, and they're all working towards a common goal. So with this specific workshop, we saw quite a bit of senior levels from the cruise ship industry, CISOs, C-suite representation, and that really, at this point in the Coast Guard's drafting and execution of these profiles was a huge win. Getting that level of attention, of that level of buy-in, and a C-suite individual spending 2 days to develop the profile highlighted the importance, and I would say also the success of publishing these profiles. Garnering, adoption of the profiles, garnering buy-in, garnering participation was a win, and highlighted the Coast Guard's, again, dedication to working with Maritime to increase cyber posture and decrease cyber risk to the MTS. So this one you did see, as you would, number 7 here, optimize and enhance guest experience and value. Of course, with a cruise ship, you're going to find that. Cruise ships are also interesting because you do have quite a bit of privacy concerns. You also have that passenger, the vessel entities that are on the cruise ship, that interaction with any of the technology. And so there was some more focus on the actual technology and separation of the technology that ran the ship, those control systems, as well as the forward-facing, the customer experience and that technology and those control systems. So that was pretty interesting to see the separation of those two. Next slide, please. Great. So I do want to show some of the kind of strategies for actually implementing the profile, incorporating the profiles into your specific organization. The profiles, the MBLT, the offshore and the passenger, are industry level profiles. And so they are focused on increasing that entire specific industry cyber posture. Individual organizations can use those profiles then to do a gap analysis and say, all right, these are the industry profile, saying, prioritization of those subcats, where I should be focusing relative attention, the dots, which I'll get into a little bit, and that's the representation of the prioritization of the subcats within each of the profiles. Those dots represent, say, your immediate needs to implement those subcats. So say 1 to 3 years. The 2-dot representation, which again, I'll give you a visual representation here. I believe it's the next slide. 2 dots are maybe your 3 to 5 year, and then the 1 dots are your 5+ lower level. But the individual organization can then take that dot chart, do a gap analysis of where they're at, and then where they are targeted to be. Again, and making those business decisions. And I should have mentioned earlier when I was talking about the overview of the profiles, it is your own customization of the CSF. It is an opportunity to make business decisions based on those subcats. It is also a communication tool, which I did mention between the Coast Guard and those industry stakeholders. It's a communication tool between your C-suite, your OT folks, your IT folks, getting that, circular communication happening and being able to use the CSF, and then specifically the CSF profiles that were developed to have those conversations, do those gap analysis, identify the target of where you want to be with implementing the subcats of the CSF. So as far as the graphic here, you do want to determine, and this is development of a profile, who are your relevant stakeholders? What are the applicable laws and regulations for industries? And so with this, again, a profile and the CSF itself is voluntary, non-regulatory, but being able to show, to shape who are your applicable stakeholders based on the laws and regulations for that industry, and being armed with that information is very important. Determining if there's any relevant CSF profiles that were created or should be created, any of the supporting policies, procedures, standards of practices, and then being able to prioritize your risk goals and priorities for your organization or your industry. You should be able to assess traceability of the CSF framework profile to policies, procedures, standards, and practices. And again, I did mention that gap between risk priorities, goals, and expectations. Using an existing profile as that gap analysis or using the CSF as that gap analysis are all appropriate and applicable uses of the CSF. And then again, taking a customization with a profile. And of course, my dog is going to bark. Apologies. He has a vicious relationship with the mailman. So strategize. So necessary projects to close those gaps, dependencies between activities and projects. And again, all of this graphic represents how an organization can go about determining appropriate profiles or determining appropriate use of the CSF itself. So implementation plan, how, and again, I mentioned those dots, and that's been the representation of how an organization can go about implementing those subcats. Organizations can also use the CSF or the profile to determine an implementation plan. And then also there's methods and frequencies of future assessments. So I did mention, the 3, 2, and 1 dots, appropriate times to implement those subcats, but there's also opportunities to determine your own frequency based on your organization's needs for future assessments. So incorporate updated policies and procedures, communication, training, awareness activities, and process to monitor for external and external changes. All useful, meaningful, provides greater fidelity to your cyber risk management plans and processes by using the CSF, and specifically a CSF profile that was developed for your industry. Next slide, please. Great. And so as I promised, you get to see a representation of the dot chart. So this graphic is a summary of the MBLT, so Maritime Bulk Liquid Transfer priorities of the subcats. Again, there's 108 subcats that was revised in 2018. Prior to that, there were 98, but this first one was focused on the 98 and it was updated. Any of the future profiles are focused on the 108 subcats. So if you do see the 3 dot representation is the highest priority. Again, that's your 1 to 3 year business investments, your business discussions, your business priorities. 2 dots, 3 to 5, 1 dot, focus maybe on that 5 to 10, those long-term goals, the long-term prioritization of your business assets and investments. It's also, as I mentioned, that communication tool. So having that discussion, if there is a 3 dot selection under a subcat for, say, mission objective number 1, which is the highest priority mission objective for that industry that's represented in the profile, those should be conversations that are happening sooner rather than later. And I did mention that gap analysis. So the 3 dots saying this is where you should be immediately, and say your organization hasn't implemented that at all. So you have your as is and you have your target of implementation. And as you see on this right graphic, the mission objective number 1, mission objective number 2, and then the relationship to each of the subcats under that. So ideally what you should see under mission objective 1, again, that highest level mission objective, you should see more 3 dots, right? If it's your highest priority, there should be more subcats that are higher priority than, say, mission objective number 8, which is the lowest priority prioritized mission objective. So as I promised, a little bit of an explanation of the dots, how they could be used as far as is, to be analysis, gap analysis, how it can be used as a communication tool, how those dots are driven down in the form of a cybersecurity framework profile workshop, again, by industry, for industry, and focused on voluntary, non-regulatory customization of the cybersecurity framework. The Coast Guard did a exceptional job of engaging industry for these 3 profiles. And you will, Kelley will further in the presentation discuss what were the next steps of using the cybersecurity framework and some of the policy changes that happened around 2018. And with that, next slide, please. Great. I'll turn it over to you, Commander Edwards.
Thanks, Josie. Great explanation there for the profiles. I did want to kind of foot stomp that communication piece. The profiles we're definitely seeing as that equalizer to facilitate that conversation between, specifically with our industry, you know, those facility security officers that are and working with their IT personnel, trying to figure out what their cyber risk is, and really kind of coming to a common ground so that they can understand each other and figure out what's most important and align that to a timeline that makes sense with the resources they have available. So thank you for that. Moving on to our navigation and inspection circular 0120, guidelines for addressing cyber risk at Maritime Transportation Security Act regulated facilities. This was released in March of 2020. This document provides guidance to facility owners and operators in complying with the requirements to assess, document, and address computer system and network vulnerabilities. This requirement is already within our regulations, 33 CFR parts 105 and 106, and which requires regulated facilities to assess and document those vulnerabilities, as I stated, and also to incorporate that within their facility security assessments, and then again implement that with the vulnerabilities that were identified into their facility security plans. It also explains how these requirements relate to cybersecurity measures and which should be included in their facility security plans, essentially bridging that cybersecurity gap between information technology and operational technology systems that are already regulated. And moving on to the vessel side of things, for vessel cyber risk management, work instruction 027 revision 2, and how that is associated with the IMO resolution, as you see here. The International Maritime Organization's Maritime Safety Committee published this resolution, MSC 42898, which required under the International Safety Management Code to address cyber risks. The U.S. Coast Guard's Commercial Vessel Compliance Office issued this work instruction to provide guidance regarding the Coast Guard Commercial Vessel Compliance Program's approach to assessing risk on vessels to ensure vessels don't pose a risk to the marine transportation system due to a cyber event. As maritime operations become more reliant on the systems integrated through automation, cyber risk is an area of increasing concern in the marine transportation system. So the Coast Guard recognizes that not all shipping companies and ships are alike, and therefore this safety management system provides shipping companies the ability to tailor a structured system to address the evolving cybersecurity vulnerabilities unique to that company or end vessel's specific management and operations. And really, both the resolution, the IMO resolution, and the work instruction are just requiring and encouraging that establishment of procedures for response to a potential cyber attack. Next up is the Coast Guard cyber workforce and how we're building out that cyber workforce. First, we have been implementing and putting into place our marine transportation system specialist cyber positions. We're putting those we have some already at our districts and our areas, and some are being hired on as we speak to the different field sectors. So all across the Coast Guard at different levels. And these individuals will be dedicated subject matter experts for all things MTS cyber. And their main role will be to provide field personnel, Coast Guard field personnel, and the commands in the field. So they're your captains of the port who are responsible for the safety and security of the port areas, provide that guidance to them, and that be that liaison for cyber risk management within the MTS with our industry stakeholders and partners. And then secondly, we have within the Coast Guard Cyber Command, we've been building out our what we call cyber protection teams, our CPTs. And the CPTs missions are to enhance the resiliency of the MTS critical infrastructure against cyber disruption through consistent proactive engagements with public and private industry organizations. And the CPT is ready to deploy to conduct operations, whether that is post-incident or to provide assessment and guidance to some of our industry partners. The CPTs can, like I mentioned there, CPTs can provide aid to vessel and maritime facility operators to assess the causes, impact, and what actions to take to prevent recurrence of potential cyber incidents. The CPT presence also provides that technical expertise that is helping cultivate relationships with other government agencies and government responders such as the FBI. And then as you see here, additionally, we have our Maritime Cyber Readiness Branch, which has been providing a lot of guidance and kind of sit down basic cyber hygiene and how our facility inspectors, our Coast Guard facility inspectors can go out and engage with industry to take a look at what it is they're implementing within their facility security plans and what it is they should be looking at when they conduct the cyber portion of their facility security assessments. Moving on to our maritime port engagement with our port partners and stakeholders. Internationally, Coast Guard has participated in multiple international cyber engagements and continues to grow in size and frequency, contributing to strengthened partnerships and shared lessons learned to drive toward shared adoption of cybersecurity standards and fulfillment of the goals and objectives outlined in all the different cyber strategies, the Coast Guard strategy, the DHS cybersecurity strategy, as well as the national cyber strategy. We've had partner engagements kind of all over the world, Mexico, Greece, Denmark, France, Germany. So they serve to illustrate this growing and mutual beneficial dynamic. On the domestic port engagement side of things, our main venue for engagement with our domestic port stakeholders is through our area maritime security committees, specifically through our local captains of the port, our port security specialists that sit at the different Coast Guard sector units, and as well as our, like I mentioned, our marine transportation system specialists, cyber, that are coming on board uh, over the last couple years, but then are going to be coming on board across the Coast Guard. Additionally, that work amongst the local captains of the port and the local industry stakeholders via the area maritime security committees allows for that awareness and priority alignment with the captains of the port priorities, which ultimately aligns with those different cyber strategies, as well as the area maritime security plans that are developed, which is particularly helpful when a port is looking to apply for example, the Port Security Grant Program that FEMA has for different security initiatives that might be going on with the specific port. So that engagement allows for our industry partners to know what those priorities are, and engagement with the Area Maritime Security Committee to kind of come to an agreement, and also to just be aware of the needs of a port in the port as a whole, and determine what to prioritize when applying for such grants. And then like I mentioned previously, our cyber protection teams and our Maritime Cyber Readiness Branch out of Coast Guard Cyber has been doing quite a bit of engagement with our domestic port partners. The cyber protection teams have deployed for after incidents, but they've also had a lot of engagement and outreach to work with not only Coast Guard unit personnel, but in conjunction with specifically our facility industry, our maritime facility industry partners for assessments and different engagements like of that. And then our Maritime Cyber Readiness Branch provides a lot of outreach and education, like I said, on basic cyber hygiene readiness and best practices, both to our Coast Guard personnel in the field that are doing the inspections and outreach within their areas, as well as some work and tabletop discussions with our facility security officers at our MTSA regulated facilities, and different personnel, and kind of help them bring the right people to the table when they're addressing cyber risk and vulnerabilities within their facilities. And then moving on to our, like I mentioned, I wanted to bring up some of our, the avenues that we utilize for information sharing for cyber related information within the MTS. And one of those tools we utilize is our Marine Safety Information Bulletins. So they facilitate information sharing and policy change notifications with our industry partners, and they're tailored communications that we utilize in conjunction with a couple different other things, such as our Maritime Commons blog, our safety alerts, various policy letters, but the MSIB is a pretty streamlined tool that we utilize. And most recently, we utilized it for a couple different cyber related incidents. As you can see here in the center, MSIB 1920 that we released for malicious email spoofing incidents. And that highlighted several recent cyber events involving increasingly sophisticated malicious email spoofing techniques within the MTS. And highlighting what those potential cascading consequences and impacts would be or could be within the maritime transportation system. So we saw that as we saw the trends there and worked with Coast Guard Cyber and determined, this was something that we needed to highlight and get out to our industry partners to make them aware if they weren't already, and what they could do to implement implement some prevention measures, but also to how to address it if they had been impacted by it. And then the other two there you see were as a result of the urgent notice that CISA put out regarding the SolarWinds compromised software. So we try to make these, write these in context for our maritime transportation system stakeholders, so that it's not an overload of information that's being spun out to them. We want to make it. Make sense. We want to make sure that they have the why as to this is important to them. So always want to try. We're always trying to work with our partners in Coast Guard Cyber, at CISA, and various other entities that put out different types of information sharing on events like this. So anyway, this is our main avenue for getting that information out. It's something that the industry is familiar with in particular, and we look to be using it in the future. And so lastly, our maritime cyber risk assessment model. Josie had mentioned this as she closed up on the profiles, but we had planned, after those profiles had been completed, we had planned to work again to build out another CSF profile for possibly navigation or autonomous vessels. But our efforts were redirected by the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018, which interestingly enough addressed maritime security, and were redirected. So we were redirected to build out a maritime cyber risk assessment model. The development of this MICRAM came from the requirements, like I said, of that Reauthorization Act, and we have developed a proof of concept, but we're continuing to build out, hopefully, through development engagement with our different partner agencies and maritime stakeholders. So the MICRAM leverages that NIST cybersecurity framework, similarly to how the profiles are leveraged, and will be a tool for individual MTSA regulated facilities, companies, or ports and harbors to conduct that baseline self-assessment of where they stand in regards to mitigating their particular cyber risks. It allows the user to prioritize based on their own determination of business needs and priorities and available resources. And we hope to see it as a nationwide standard model that will help the port and maritime community really identify what their cybersecurity risks are. So very, very similar to a profile, but more of a whole MTS approach. The MICRAM proof of concept, like I mentioned, has been created, and it's undergone some review by some select maritime stakeholder work groups, and a follow-on contract is under review, and hopefully we'll get that awarded. But we're looking for that next contract to allow for that continued enhancement and development of the model, so it can become more robust tool that's scalable to the needs of its users. So among the many potential uses, we're looking for it to be designed to assist in feeding the developing facility security plans, like I've mentioned previously here today. So those facility security plans, area maritime security plans, and other risk management plans that are utilized by those MTS stakeholders. The MICRAM focus to date has been not internal to the Coast Guard, so not necessarily a tool that's to address cyber risk from an internal perspective for the Coast Guard, but rather a voluntary tool that these MTS industry stakeholders can use for their benefit. though there are very clear benefits that for the Coast Guard. And then, so like I said, we were trying to set up another period of performance for looking at further development of this MCRAM. And particularly, we see there are opportunities even beyond this next 2-year period to look at optimizing and improving the functionality and the user interface, or identify other ways that could satisfy any need for additional, for example, cyber threat input or risk management, any other tools, risk management tools or inputs and or outputs, and potentially leveraging the critical infrastructure cyberspace analysis tool, the CICAT, and then which would help us incorporate some tailored risk scenarios and then potentially have a scoring element to it. And like I said, we're hoping to get that awarded soon, and so that we can continue working and enhancing the proof of concept that we developed last year. But like I said, hopefully it's a tool that is a voluntary tool for our industry stakeholders, but hopefully similar to what the profiles do for the marine bulk liquid transfer and passenger vessel and offshore sub-industries of the maritime industry. Hopefully this can be something that is utilized at many different levels, from the Area Maritime Security Committee level all the way down to a small mom and pop facility security officer that's trying to identify vulnerabilities and identify where it's important to look at to address their cyber risk and to meet the purpose of the regulations, as was mentioned, are required via that NAVIC that I addressed. Josie, would you like to add anything on to this discussion here?
No, thank you for the opportunity, though.
All right, great. Well, I think that closes out our discussion today. Thank you so much, Josie, for joining us today and giving your background on those profiles. You definitely did better than I could. So I appreciate the assistance today. And here is my email address. Again, I am Lieutenant Commander Kelley Edwards from the Office of Port and Facility Compliance at Coast Guard Headquarters. Please reach out if you do have any questions on the profiles or anything else that we discussed today. And thank you so much.